So welcome to part 2 of our discussion on the methods of research in developmental psychology. Wala nang paligoy-ligoy pa, let's get straight to the other research methods na ginagamit natin in the field of DevPsych. We have the following research methods for part 2: longitudinal research, cross-sectional research, and the very popular twin study research. Unahin natin pag-usapan what longitudinal research is. Basically, in longitudinal research, we gather data from a group of people through the years. So, keywords for longitudinal research through the years. So you would not forget, nilagay ko dyan yung mukha ni Kenny Rogers na kumanta ng Through the Years. Actually, kung nasa face-to-face class tayo, kakantahin ko sana yan yung Through the Years niyan. Pero wala online tayo. I don't like to sing in online kasi it does not give justice to the quality of my voice when I sing. Anyway, so just remember those words, through the years. So in longitudinal research, we select a group of people that we want to observe, and then we follow them as they mature. We follow them as they age, and then we take note of certain changes that we can see from that group of people. So dito pa lang, malalaman nyo na that longitudinal research takes a lot of time. It's very time consuming. It will last more than a year, or there are longitudinal researches na nagtagal ng more than 10 years, no? So that's what you mean by longitudinal research. One of the most popular longitudinal research that was done in the field was the Seattle longitudinal study. So if you have time, maybe after the video, read something about the Seattle longitudinal study. But basically, this longitudinal study wanted to find out how our intellectual ability changes as we age. Ano ba nangyayari? Ano ba yung mga pagbabago na dapat nating asahan in terms of our intellectual capacities as we grow older? And one of the most popular results based on this longitudinal study was our intellectual capacities as we age, it will fall down. It will decrease, as you can see on the slide. But it still depends on which mental capacities are we talking about. Different mental capacities will have different rates of decline. Merong mga intellectual capacities mas mabilis bumaba compared to other intellectual capacities. So, for example, based on the slide, inductive reasoning will fall, but it will fall differently compared to spatial orientation, compared to perceptual speed, numerical ability, verbal ability, or verbal memory. So all of these mental capacities will eventually decline, but the rate of decline will differ depending on what intellectual capacity are we talking about. So this is a very important finding na nalaman natin in developmental psychology, because before this longitudinal study, people believe that in general, our intellectual capacities go down. Diba? But this Seattle longitudinal study was able to show to us that the intellectual decline must be understood in terms of specific intellectual capacities. So how did we discover this? By doing a longitudinal study. Another important longitudinal research in DevPsych was done by Louis Terman. Louis Terman is very popular in the field of psychology because he developed the popular Stanford Binet intelligence test. So during those times, he developed the Stanford Binet intelligence test in Stanford University. He was teaching in Stanford University when that became his project. So anyway, Louis Terman was very obsessed with measuring intelligence. So he saw an opportunity when he was given the Stanford Binet intelligence project. So basically, he developed a very well-used intelligence test, the Stanford Binet. Okay? And since he liked to measure intelligence, he used that intelligence test to study the intelligence of gifted children. Gifted children meaning ito yung mga bata na sobrang galing sa school, sobrang tataas ng IQ. Okay, so when you categorize people according to their IQs, there is a certain range in IQ scores that you call them gifted children. If I'm not mistaken, if you have an IQ of 140 and above, you will be considered a gifted child. Okay, you are intellectually superior compared to other children. Now, he wanted to study their lives. What is the life of kids who are considered gifted? If you study them from their childhood until they reach old age, what is it like to be a gifted child? And so, gumawa siya ng isa sa mga pinakamahabang longitudinal study done in the field of psychology. It started 1928 and it still continues today. Although, of course, Louis Thurman is already gone, but his students, the successors he selected, continued the longitudinal study that Louis Thurman started. You see? Kaya nga napakalakas kumain ng oras ng longitudinal study. Even Louis Thurman himself was not able to see his study finished. Oo, nauna pa siyang mamatay kaysa doon sa study niya. Yung study niya ngayon, hanggang ngayon, buhay pa. You know, Louis Thurman is already gone. So one lesson that you can learn here is when you do your thesis, don't do a longitudinal study, no? Kasi hindi kayo gagraduate. So anyway, what are the major findings of longitudinal study by Louis Thurman? Number one, first bullet, he discovered from observing these gifted children through the years that giftedness is very stable across life. In other words, if you are a gifted child at the age of 3, you will be still gifted when you reach middle childhood, when you reach late childhood, adolescence, young adulthood, middle adulthood, even in old age. So your IQ is very consistent across the life stage, which gives support to the idea that IQ is highly genetic. It is more in nature, more nurture. You have it. If you're gifted, you have it. It's within your brain. Your brain cells are special. Your brain cells work in a certain way that makes you a gifted child, and it remains consistent all throughout the lifespan. Second bullet, according to his longitudinal research, gifted children are well-rounded. Because during those times, people had a stereotype of gifted children as sickly, mga ano raw sila, mga bookworms, mga nerd, that they don't have social life. Pero based on what Thurman found out, he discovered that gifted children are very well-rounded people. They have a lot of friends, they have very strong relationships, far from the usual nerdy types that people believe they are. Hindi pala nerdy, hindi pala mga may sariling mundo, hindi pala mga weirdo yung mga gifted kids. In fact, they are very social individuals. They have very healthy emotional life. Third bullet, based on the longitudinal research, Louis Thurman found out that giftedness leads to social achievement. If you follow them up through the years, most gifted children become wealthy. In fact, if he compared the wealth of gifted children compared to non-gifted children, and he found out that the total amount of wealth in terms of dollars ng mga gifted children are in the top 3% of the entire American population. Meaning, yung mga pinakamayayaman sa America, most likely, are gifted ones. They're very smart. And not to mention, most of these gifted children, not only they're wealthy, but they are also successful in their relationships. They are very socially well-adjusted and their marriages last longer. Diba? Which tells you na kinakailangan mo rin ng certain level of intellect to maintain marriage. Kasi nung kinumpara niya yung marital success ng mga gifted children sa mga non-gifted children, or even those children with low levels of intelligence, guess what? Those kids or those people in the low levels of intelligence most likely are already divorced. They have a lot of marital problems, which tells you partially that to maintain a marriage, you need a certain level of intellectual competence. 'Di ba? Magandang ano yan, magandang finding ni Louis Thurman yan. Okay, so one lesson that we can learn here is before you get married or when you choose a mate, when you choose a partner, more or less it would make sense if one of your quality or if one of your requirement or standard is intellectual capacity. Di ba dapat tinitignan din yan? Oo. Hindi ako nagsabi niyan. No? Ang sabi niya si Louis Thurman na isang importanteng trait yan na dapat nahanapin mo from your partner because that will help you more or less stabilize your marriage. Unless you want to get divorced. or annulled in the future. Okay? So very interesting findings by Louis Terman simply by using longitudinal research. How is cross-sectional research different from longitudinal research? Just remember, cross-sectional research is the shortcut version of longitudinal research. In cross-sectional research, no need to wait. Hindi mo na kinakailangan mag-antay. Kasi nga, pag longitudinal research, you'll wait for many years. Susundan mo yung subjects mo as they grow older, as they mature. But what if you are writing a thesis? What if you want to graduate immediately? Ayaw mo na mag-intay ng 1 year, you do a cross-sectional research. Because in cross-sectional research, basically what we do is, instead of waiting for one group to mature and enter different developmental stages, what we do in cross-sectional research is we already find groups in different life stages. So let's say we find a group of people who are in childhood. Then we find people who are in adolescence. We find people who are young adulthood. Diba? So in that case, there's no need to wait. You can already analyze these different groups of people simultaneously without waiting for one group to mature and enter different developmental stages. One example of cross-sectional research that I want to introduce is none other than my research paper. In fact, this research paper that was published last year was my thesis. Okay? So remember, my master's thesis is on developmental psychology. So of course, yung thesis ko dapat may kinalaman sa DevPsych. In that paper that I wrote, I did a cross-sectional research of 3 age groups: adolescents, young adults, and middle age. I wanted to find out what is their level of religiosity and self-efficacy. Gets? So, in terms of experimental psychology, I have 2 dependent variables here, religiosity and self-efficacy. So, I wanted to know how religiosity and self-efficacy differ across people in different age groups: adolescents, young adults, and middle age. And what did I find out? Based on my research, I found out that religiosity increases through adolescence, young adulthood, and middle age. That means if you do a cross-sectional research on this, my data shows that the highest religiosity levels belong to people who are in middle age, followed by people in young adulthood, pinaka hindi religious yung mga nasa adolescence. And number 2, so does self-efficacy. Ganun din yung pattern ng self-efficacy or layman's terms, self-confidence, general self-confidence. Pinakamataas yung mga nasa middle age, sunod yung mga nasa young adulthood, pinakamababa ang self-efficacy ng mga adolescents. Which makes me conclude that there are specific experiences in human development that strengthens religiosity and self-efficacy. Diba? Kasi nga, yung pattern ko, for self-efficacy and religiosity, it increases as one ages, at least cross-sectionally. So, there might be certain forces within development na nagpapataas ng religiosity at ng self-efficacy as people age. Question, what are those experiences? That I don't know. That became my recommendation for future researchers to answer. Another lesson about developmental psychology research, that's how research works. You start with a question, you answer the question, but you end up with another question. And that another question will be answered by future researchers that will extend the findings of your study. Diba? Nanganganak ng panibagong tanong yung isang research. Nagsimula ka sa tanong, sinagot mo yung tanong, nanganak ng bagong tanong. That's how scientific research works. That is how the field of science grows. And that's what makes the field of science so exciting. Diba? Lagi kang merong bagong tanong na itatanong after mong sagutin ang isang tanong. Alright, so I hope you got the difference between longitudinal research and cross-sectional research. Now, let's close this video by discussing twin studies. In twin studies, as the term implies, we study twins. Okay? Twins. And there are 2 basic kinds of twins. We have identical twins and non-identical twins. Kayo nang bahala magbasa anong difference between identical twins and non-identical twins. But in developmental psychology research, it seems like researchers are more interested with identical twins. Now, before we talk about that, the main goal of twin studies is to answer a very important question in DevPsych. How much of development is nature? How much of it is nurture? You know this, right? The nature or nurture debate. Now, we know that the answer to that question is both, right? The psyche of the person is both the product of nature and nurture. But it's not as simple as both influence development. Although they both influence development, they vary in degree in terms of influencing development. Some aspects of our psyche are more influenced by genes, some aspects are more influenced by the environment. Question: how do you measure the degree of influence of genes and environment to a certain psychological trait? Halimbawa, intelligence. O, how many percent of intelligence, of our overall intelligence, is the influence of genes? How many percent is environment? Or let's say, for example, your ano ba, your moral reasoning, your ability to reason in terms of morality. O, ilang porsyento ng moral reasoning genes? Ilang porsyento environment? To answer those questions, you carry out twin studies. The basic assumption in twin studies is traits shared by identical twins who are reared apart are nature, not shared is nurture. 'Di ba? Ano ibig sabihin ng identical twins? Again, yung they share 100% of their genetic makeup, 'di ba? One egg splitted later on into two individuals. Carbon copy of each other, identical twins. In twin studies, most developmental psychologists are more interested with twins, identical twins who are reared apart. 'Di ba? Yung twin 1 is in one country, twin 2 is in another country. Imagine that. There are twins. The first twin, one country, the second twin in another country. Now, whatever characteristics that they will share in common, remember, they have not met. They have different environments, right? So whatever traits they will have in common, yung pagkakapareho nila. Assumption, that is genetics. That trait is the influence of genes. While the traits that they don't share, they're identical twins, they are from different cultures, they are from different places, then that will be the influence of nurture or environment. Maliwanag ba? So that's how important twin studies are in the field of developmental psychology. Let me give you some examples. Let's say we have a twin here, reared apart. Twin 1 grew up in the Philippines, twin 2 grew up in England. Now, here's the thing. Let's say we observe that twin 1 developed depression during adolescence. When we see twin 2 in England also develop depression during adolescence, then that will make us think that depression has a genetic basis. Diba? Imposibleng environmental to kasi magkaiba nga silang environment eh. Diba? Ang layo ng environment ng Pilipinas sa England, and yet they develop the same condition. Therefore, depression has genetic basis. And it does, by the way. Alam niyo ba yon? If you study abnormal psychology, malaki ang contribution ng genetic predisposition ng tao to experience depression. But of course, we are not saying it's 100% genetics. Meron ding role yung environment, right? But based on the studies, it seems like between genes and environment, mas malaki ang hatak ng genes. Mas malaki ang influence ng genes sa depression compared to environment. Another example, twin 1 in the Philippines, twin 2 in England. Twin 1 in the Philippines, this guy became a basketball varsity here in the Philippines. Naging green archer, let's say. While twin 2 in England, naging football varsity. Oh. So what can we conclude here? Well, we can say that the specific choice of sports is nurture. Right? Whether you will play basketball or football, depende yan sa kultura kung saan ka lumaki. Why do you think twin 1 chose basketball? Because that's the national sport in the Philippines. Diba? Although hindi natin cultural sport yan, but most people in the Philippines are obsessed with basketball. Diba? Iba ang sitwasyon pag nasa England ka. Hindi naman sila ganun kahilig sa basketball sa England because their sport is football. Therefore, we can say that the choice of sport they will play, that's environmental, influence of culture. But the fact that they became both athletes, we can say that athleticism or the overall interest in sports can be genetics. That's nature. O, diba? I hope you can get the logic of twin studies. Okay? Some other psychological aspects that are strongly nature based on this methodology is psychological disorders. Alam nyo ba yon? Halos lahat. Sabi ko halos lahat, so hindi lahat. Halos lahat ng psychological disorders merong genetic basis. If twin 1 has a certain disorder, most likely twin 2 will also have that disorder. So a lot of psychological disorders have a genetic basis. You read a textbook on abnormal psychology. Karamihan talaga ng mga psychological disorders, they will tell you it has a genetic basis. You got it through genes. You inherited it. You genetically inherited those predispositions to develop certain disorders. Number 2 is IQ. There are a lot of studies out there that shows to us that if twin 1 is a valedictorian, twin 2 most likely will also become valedictorian, which again gives evidence that intelligence is highly nature. You remember Thurman, di ba? Yun din yung kanyang conclusion, no? So, nag-merge yung conclusion ni Thurman na longitudinal dito sa conclusion ng twin studies. That's how developmental psychology research works, no? If one research method confirms the conclusion of another research method, then it gives more power to that conclusion. Like yung ginawa kong example that IQ is highly genetics. Oh, they found that to be true in twin studies. They found that to be true in longitudinal research. Therefore, the idea that IQ is highly genetic, malakas yan. Most likely, that is a psychological truth. Number 3, some aspects of your personality are also highly genetics. Now, you have to look at your personality as 5 separate components. You remember this, the big 5 theory. Ocean, openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Now, the thing is, some of this ocean is highly genetic, some of this ocean is highly environmental. Okay? Like what? Sa ocean, ano dyan ang one of the traits here that is very genetic? Guess what? Neuroticism. Diba? Your tendency to experience negative emotions, fearfulness, anxiety, worry, guilt, that is very genetics. So if twin 1 is very high in neuroticism, most likely twin 2 in another country, without them meeting each other, you expect twin 2 to also have high neuroticism. Okay na lang bahala mag-research. Kamusta yung O, C, E, and A? Is O more on genetic or environment? How about C, E, and A? But neuroticism, studies show, it's very genetics. Nature ang neuroticism. Okay? I searched some universities out there that carries a laboratory that carries out twin studies. And one of the universities is Michigan State University. Did you know that this school, meron silang twin registry? So if you have a twin, if you know someone who are identical twins or even non-identical twins, okay, you can register to this registry by MSU and you will get paid by registering. But when you enter your names here, you are allowing the university to carry out studies on you. Maliwanag. So you can only imagine na in this twin registry, how many twins have they studied? Hundreds of thousands of twins. And then, based on this registry, different psychologists in MSU can carry out different twin studies to talk about developmental topics. Like, for example, ito yung mga sample studies na ginawa using the twin studies in the twin registry. They talk about hormones, behavior, and brain activity. They talk about the twin study of mood, behavior, and hormones during puberty. They talk about eating, mood, and hormones during adolescence using twin study research. O ano pa? Ito, behavioral adjustment. Blood spot environmental epidemiology project. Di ko alam ano yan. Brain activity study. Okay? So, again, very popular method talaga ang twin study, especially in the field of developmental psychology. But one hot topic in twin studies today in developmental psychology is homosexuality. Diba? One day you realize you are attracted to people of the same sex. That's a change. Diba? Nung bata ka pa, hindi mo pa iniisip yan. You thought you will be straight, but one day you felt sexual feelings to people of the same sex. That's a change. 'Di ba? So ang tanong, saan nanggaling yung feeling mo na yon? Is homosexuality genetic? Is there such a thing as the gay gene? Ang dami-daming debate diyan. Meron ba talagang gay gene? If you are a homosexual, are you made homosexual? Are you by nature homosexual? Did you choose to be a homosexual or not? Were you programmed by genes to be a homosexual? But the thing is, in terms of this question, iba-iba ng sagot. Ang dami-dami ng mga twin studies na ginawa dito and the results are not consistent. Like for example, in this study, the answer is yes, it's genetics. It's biological. Once you were born, guess what? You already have a predisposition to be a homosexual. But this study is saying no, it's environmental. Pero mga recent studies yan ha. Oo, mga recent studies ito. Mga nangyari lang ito for in the past 5 years. Oh, pero hindi sila magkasundo. Yes, it's genetics. No, it's environmental. But then again, so paano natin i-resolve yun? In developmental psychology research, what if researchers are having different answers? Well, the answer is science is self-correcting. Right? Along the way, as we do more research, laging merong mas lalamang dyan. Depende kung sino ba talaga yung mas tama. Is homosexuality nature? Is homosexuality nature or nurture? Only time will tell. Let's do more research and then titignan natin kung sino yung finding na mas nagiging consistent as time goes by. And that is when we conclude the answer to the question if homosexuality is genetics or not. Okay, so to close our video for today, part 2, same takeaways as I have given in video 1. Okay, so ganun pa rin. DevSec is a science, think like a scientist. Huwag tayong pakalat ng mga knowledge about psychology na hindi naman produkto ng scientific method. That's how we show our respect to our field. That is how we should communicate our field to other people. Everything we say must be based on the scientific method. Number 2, a good psych major has a mastery of different research methods. Alam niyo na yan. Diba? Kaya dapat, when you have the opportunity to study the different research methods, please take that seriously. That is the skill that all psychologists, all psych majors should have. And number 3, look forward to your thesis. So sana, by listening to my first video and this second video, I was able to help you to, again, familiarize yourself with some topics in DevPsych, and at the same time, you're able to get ideas on what research topics you would like to work on by the time you enter your thesis. Okay, so let's call the day off. Thank you everyone for listening here in day 2 of our discussion on the research methods in developmental psychology. I will see you during the live session and we will discuss and add more details on this topic, research in developmental psychology. Okay, thank you for listening. Have a great day. Bye-bye and God bless.